Hello, this month's guest interview is with Elizabeth Lesser, whose new book, Cassandra Speaks, is an important testament to the power of the female voice in society throughout the ages. Elizabeth has been an activist, a teacher, as well as the co-founder of the Omega Institute, and is one of the most sensitive and thoughtful people that I know. I hope you enjoy our interview. The book is all about Cassandra, what Cassandra knew and no one believed her about. I just want to ask you, what do you think women know that we need in this time of crisis?
Okay, well, I feel I have to kind of go back
Yeah.
and talk about the process of writing the book. But I just want to say, you are the first person I am talking to about this book.
Oh,
Um,
I'm
I I
honored.
I have not, it hasn't been published yet. It will be in September 2020, and so I'm practicing with all of you and with you, Mark. And I couldn't think of a better person to do this with, my
Oh,
buddy
thanks.
and someone I respect so much. So, um, I've as one of the founders of Omega and a curator of conferences for many, many years, more than 40 years now. I have convened many conferences for women over the years, starting back in the 1980s and 90s. And I started doing a conference called Women in Power, probably 10 or 15 years ago. Uh, I had this idea one day, because I myself was a woman in a powerful role, like, people get really uncomfortable when you put those two words together, women and
Mm,
power.
mm,
It made me uncomfortable. What is this thing I have in me that I'm not supposed to own my power? And I started convening conferences around it, bringing powerful women from a whole different variety, artists, leaders, doctors, an astronaut, everyone I could
mm,
think of. What is your relationship to power? What do you think power is and isn't? And how can women be different in it? So the book really took years and years of that kind of in-depth research, and I tried to, for these times when the issues about gender are
mm,
so confusing. Here I am talking to you, a man who I consider to have a very evolved feminine. So I did not want the voice of the book to be exclusive, exclusionary
mm,
to people for who either feel gender fluid or men, women. I also didn't want to use that kind of goddess language of the feminine. So it took me so many years to find the right voice for this book,
mm,
which is that, yes, women, to really claim it, women do have something the world needs now.
mm,
And can we do it in a way that includes? Um, so I look to those old myths, Adam and Eve, Cassandra, Pandora, all sorts of Shakespearean plays and literature, and the way our culture has told women, be quiet. You were born second, but you were the first to sin.
mhm,
There's a huge variety of myths,
mm.
from the Greeks to the Hindus and Buddhists and Christian and Jewish. Women came second, but they wrecked stuff anyway.
Mhm.
So um, I forget your original question.
Just, I'm curious to know what, particularly in this crisis that we're having in this moment, what do women know that the world needs to hear?
Well, one aspect of the book that I spend a lot of time in is helping us to rid our language and our
Mm,
concepts of war.
mm,
That war is the metaphor to solve all problems.
mm,
This against that, winning against losing. As you can see, our president is calling himself a war president. We're talking about the war on this virus. When that's the first metaphor, and testosterone does drive that concept
mhm,
of war and battle, and all of the myths that humans still live by are the hero's journey, the battle myth. So coronavirus, um, is to me less of an enemy and more of a messenger.
Mm-hmm.
The coronavirus has come to tell and teach us something. And I do think women have a capacity to listen before attacking, um, to absorb, and this idea of the nurture, the instinct to care before the instinct to combat.
Right.
And that's why it isn't only that women have only been allowed to be in the nurturing roles, it's our instinct to do that, to nurture and care. And the problem is that we have reduced those jobs and roles and instincts to second-class behavior. Kindergarten teachers, whereas firemen and women, like heroes, kindergarten teachers. It's really nice. But actually, I'm all about, and the book is about, giving a musculature, a strength, a power to care and love and goodness, and the instinct to stop, listen, learn, care, as opposed to battle, prevail, win.
Right. I love the way you talk about grade school teachers and as the first responders.
Right. I mean, first responders are awesome. Thank you, first responders. But there are what I call, as you say, the first responders. If we were energizing respect, let's say for a kindergarten teacher who's teaching boys and girls how to communicate, how to iron out relationships before battling, mindful behavior, stop, look at yourself first, learn how to deal with your own ego. Those are the first responders. If we elevated that, oh my God, paid more, respected more, elevated statues in parks about kindergarten teachers, and it's not just them. It's nurses, it's home care people, it's mothers and fathers, and the people who care.
Right.
Not that policemen and firemen don't care, but it's a different way of caring.
Yeah, of course. I love what you talked about, the statue in Central Park and putting a woman giving birth next to the guy in battle.
Yeah.
How that would shift our sense of what strength looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I live in New York, so I'm often in Central Park. For years, I'd walk by those statues, never looked at them really. One day I just was walking, and I was walking from uptown on Fifth Avenue all the way across the park, downtown more. And I came upon, I think, 4 different statues of young, beautiful men in battle, holding their bleeding compatriots dying, or General Sherman on a gold horse. And I thought, wow, where are the statues of a woman giving birth? Like there's blood with the soldiers, there's trying and physical strength. What about that? It might sound absurd to see a woman with her legs spread and a baby coming out. Why not? Who decided this?
Right. I love that. That's great. Let's talk a little bit more about our current situation before we get more into the book. So a lot of people are talking about this being a new era now, that the virus has really shifted and feeling like we're never going to be the same. Do you have that kind of do you have that sense of there having been that we've really crossed over into a new era?
I would love that. That'd be great. I don't like the old era, but that's just not historically evident that massive things happen, wars, plagues, environmental disasters, 9/11, and suddenly the world totally changes and people start singing Kumbaya and it's all great. I think we learn incrementally, very, very slowly. So I hope we will learn a few things, but I don't expect it to be there was then and there's now. As it just, maybe the gods will intervene and that will happen, but that's not history. I think there's always an edge of the populace who get what the virus or the war or the fires has come to teach us, who are actually saying, hello, COVID-19, sent from God, what have you come to show us? I think a lot of people are saying that. Not enough to totally change the world, but if those of us who even have that consciousness stick with it and be it, really inhabit it and have it strengthen what we already knew, that we asked for one world, we got it. It doesn't only just show up as unicorns and rainbows. It also shows up as viruses and as culture clashes. So we have to, more than anything right now, accept this. This messenger is telling us oneness takes a lot of work. And it takes a lot of ego softening. And to say, I am big enough to hold oneness, which has a lot of beautiful, unifying love. And it also has a lot of darkness. So here's an example of it. Can we hold it? Can we accept it and not have a tantrum like, I don't want this. I don't like being in the house. Like, we asked for it. We want to go and travel wherever we want, whenever we want. We want to be a global community. Well, we're going to share everything then.
Everything. That's exactly. Matthew Fox said, we live in a beautiful world, not a pretty one.
Yeah. Oh, that's so nice.
I love that. I love that. Right. So there's going to be some shifts, and it's going to be incremental. And there are going to be people who are still playing the blame game, as we see with the Chinese virus. But there's also an edge. There's an edge that's growing and creative.
I do believe that.
Yeah.
And I think each one of us who feels that way, it's a huge responsibility not to slip into fear. Yeah. Or into weariness, or like, yeah, life's a bitch and then you die, kind of like, what's new about this? No, this could be incredibly new. And so to, as the Sufis say, trust in God, but tie your camel. Right. Like, stay super open, super hopeful, and really logical about it.
Right. So let's talk about the Garden of Eden and the Adam and Eve story. And can you offer a new interpretation of how to see the Adam and Eve story?
Oh, wow. I spent so much time living in that story. In the book, I write about a painting that I saw in Florence many, many years ago. I don't know, 30. I was at the tail end of one of those dark periods in your life. This happened to be a divorce, and a divorce that just rocked, as most people's do, every aspect of my life, finances, children, everything. And there's an incredible 2-paneled, huge painting in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence of Adam and Eve. And I was so much in the conversation of men and women and whose fault was it, and blame and fear and paranoia, the whole thing. Everybody watching who's been through a split up knows this feeling. And I stood there for a long time looking at this painting. It's now my screensaver. It's become a huge part of my life. In it, Adam is standing there looking kind of like, I don't know what happened. Like, but this, I don't know why we got to leave this garden. Just innocent and and beautiful in his body, and Eve's got the serpent wound around her, and her eyes are crafty, and 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 she's kind of looking at Adam like, get it together, dude. Like, we got to grow up. We have to leave this garden. We're not children anymore. And I started reinterpreting the myth the minute I saw that painting. Like, no, Eve and the serpent weren't evil. And Adam wasn't this golden, strong human who was in conversation with God, but made a mistake by listening to Eve. Eve was the grown-up. She knew it was time to individuate from Father God. And it was time to leave the paradise of the womb or the paradise of childhood and go out into the world and learn the lesson that we were put here to learn, how to live in this garden responsibly as adults, not as children. That is the way I began to interpret it after seeing that painting. And I've been reading about it from Jungians and religious scholars on both sides, like, I don't know how literal interpreters of the Bible are going to welcome this book. But the minute you stray into reinterpreting the way myths have been interpreted, myths were written, sorry, religious literalists, were written by people and interpreted by people. Most of those people were men. Men wrote the Greek myths. Men wrote the Bible stories. Men have interpreted them. Nothing wrong with that, but if women had also written stories and interpreted stories, same time of history, with the same equal voice, it would have been different. The story of Eve and Adam in the garden, what is it? It's a way of trying to explain to us poor lost humans, why is it so hard here in a garden? We have everything we need. Why is life so hard? Why do we die? Why is there sometimes pestilence and viruses and wars? Why can't we get along? Oh, okay, let's tell this story. It was great, but then this woman listened to a snake and we got thrown out. And then you build a whole worldview around that.
Right. And part of this book's purpose is to jettison that worldview and replace it with something that's more integrated, balanced, fair. Go ahead.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, not to throw it out, like, not that those old myths and the hero's journey and the Garden of Eden, not that they're not beautiful and have a lot of viable storylines in them. And something to learn from and listen from, but to understand they're a slice of the story, and that slice left out some storytellers, some points of view. It's like if you go to the movies and watched a World War II movie, let's say, and that was the only story you ever learned. This is what life is. This is how people act. These are the only things that matter. You'd think, oh, that's the story of humanity. Right. If you went and watched a romance, and that was the only thing you ever watched, oh, people love each other. Sometimes they hurt each other, but in the end, they meet back at the
Empire State Building.
Empire State Building. Oh, that's how it works, Yeah. We learn by these stories.
Sure. But we also set up a lot of expectations through these stories.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No. Now, when I saw you last when we were doing the Woodstock Festival together, you were talking about feeling a little nervous about the reception of this book and how men were going to respond to it and how women would respond to it, particularly in the parts where you're talking about how women shame men for having emotions sometimes. And
right,
how are you feeling? Are you feeling nervous about it now?
Well, you're a writer and you teach writing, so I imagine a lot of us watching today are also writers or love writing. And writing a book, now that's a journey.
Mhm.
That's worth a myth, because at least when I'm writing a book, and it usually takes me, I don't know, 3 years, 4 years. I'm not a fast writer. These people who write a book a year, I'm like, whoa, how does that happen? Because I go through these rises and falls of like, who am I? What do I know? What? I'm not doing this. I literally tried to give back the advance for this book because I was talking about women right now and men and feminism and the feminine. It's a very dicey time. The
Mm.
whole gender fluid
Mm.
conversation. What
Mm.
is gender anyway? Will it even exist? What about people in same-sex relationships? What about trans people? What about, and I would have all those people on my shoulders saying, you can't say that. What about women of color whose struggle is of a level and vastness that I, as a privileged white woman, can't even really understand? Their
Mm.
voices are talking to me.
Mm.
At some point, I had to say, I am one person with one experience. I'm older than a lot of my readers will be or
Mhm.
not be. I'm a white woman. I'm not a man. I'm not gay. I can't speak about each of those voices. I can only speak about what I do.
Mm.
So I gave a speech at a Women in Power conference about 8 months ago
Mm.
at Omega Institute. And my speech was setting off the conference. And Tarana Burke, the founder of the Me Too movement, was
Mm.
going to speak right after me. So I gave a talk about the myth of Cassandra. Cassandra was a princess in Troy. It's a Greek myth. She was the most beautiful of all the king's daughters, and all the gods and all the
Mm.
mortals, all the men wanted her.
Mm.
And she was always being wooed. And Apollo, the son of Zeus, wooed her by giving her the gift that everyone wants, prophecy. She could see into the future. And he gave her the gift. And then he said, now you'll repay me by having sex with me. But she wouldn't do it. She didn't
Mhm.
want to. And he was furious. And instead of just taking away the gift, he spat in her mouth and he said, you will see into the future. You'll see everything, but no one will believe you.
Mm.
And slowly over years, she would predict everything. She predicted the war between Greece and Troy, the Trojan horse. She predicted the downfall of the city, the death of all of her family members. But no one believed her. And she
Mhm.
slowly began to go mad.
Mhm.
At least they said she was mad, but she wasn't mad. She was enraged and grief-stricken that no one would listen to what was going to happen. And then it happened, and it was always even worse than she saw.
Mhm.
So I told that story at this conference, and Tarana Burke, who sort of represents to me our Cassandra, she's been
Mm.
saying for 30 years, little girls, women, young women are being sexually molested, but no one's believing them.
Mhm.
And this is wounding our culture,
Mhm.
everyone. This is a root cause of real wounding and wounding behavior, but no one would believe her.
Mhm.
But she held to it. She kept saying it. And finally, the world caught up to her. And
Mhm.
look what's happened because of her, our
Mhm.
Cassandra, who the world finally listened to. So I'm telling this story, feeling in that, like, I'm just an old white lady telling a story, you know. But I came backstage. She was about to go on. I introduced her, and she had tears in her eyes, and she was like, that story, that is everything, that story. And then she gave her speech.
Beautiful.
And that was all I needed. That was what I needed to say. Just tell your story from your point of view. It will help a few people, maybe some people. Forget all those other voices. Let them tell their stories. You're not
Mhm.
against their stories.
Right.
But this is yours to tell.
Right. Right. Right.
So that left me with to answer your question, like, I know some people won't like it. I know some people will think I'm reducing gender into too small a box. I know some people who will think it's just a white person's story. I bow to everyone's opinions, but I just followed my muse with a little help from Tarana Burke.
and another muse of yours, Toni Morrison. I'd like to ask you about this phrase of hers, dream a little before you speak.
Think.
Okay. Yeah, dream a little before you think.
Yeah.
What does that mean for you?
Well, I think it's probably the same for women, men, every gender, but I'm going to speak about it through the lens of women now. We've been told that our way of thinking, our way of perceiving and filtering the world is second class. It's too emotional. It's this idea that only one form of intelligence is admired in our culture. You know, the logical intelligence that thinks in a straight line and don't get caught up in emotions. Women have a level of emotional connective intelligence that has not been admired or put forth as admirable or something that a culture would follow. You know, it's hysterical, it's too emotional. You know, our friend, we both share a friend in Eve Ensler. For years, she has said, I am an emotional creature with pride. And so we think in a way, women think in a way that's a little more round. Yes, there's logic in it, there's rationality in it, there's feeling in it, there's connectivity in it. And so this line from Toni Morrison, who I devote half of the introduction to the book to, because she truly has been a guiding muse for me, because she took the stories of a slice of the culture, the African-American experience, and she just decided, that's the voice I am sticking to, and I'm going to tell it in all of its glory so that it is a viable voice. It's not the white voice, it's the voice. So the voice of women is often filtered through a rounder way of thinking. And that thinking includes stopping and letting yourself dream of what could be before you get caught in, but that's just the way it is.
Oh, I see.
So I want women to validate our dreams. So if our dreams are like, people could, let's say a leader could be more empowering of people. It's not about one person winning. It's about more of a collective experience. It's about care. It's about elevating care above competition. Yeah, there's competition, but there's also care. I want women to believe in that dream. So that before we think that's just the way it is, I have to be this certain way in this lane that's viable in our culture, I want us to like validate our dreams, dream and feel righteous about our dreams.
Beautiful. And what's the purpose or the importance of the Galatea myth for you?
Well, thank you for bringing that myth in. That's a myth a lot of people don't know. Again, it was a painting that made me want to bring this into the book. There's a painting in the Metropolitan Museum of Art that I often visit when I'm in New York. It's of St. Joan in the Garden. It's enormous. It's the size of a wall in the Met. I like to sometimes, if I have extra time, just go sit there on a bench, because there's like hidden angels and spirits, and Joan's eyes are like blazing. And I just love that painting. It gets under my skin. So I asked my editor from HarperCollins, we were going to meet and talk about some things. I said, let's meet under the painting of Joan. and ask her for inspiration. I have the kind of editor who would do that.
Yeah. Karen.
Karen, no, I don't know if other editors would do this. So we sat there and then we were leaving and she said, yeah, but what about that painting? And there's a little painting next to Joan of Pygmalion.
Mm-hmm.
He's from Cyprus, another Greek myth. You know, Cyprus, Troy, Greece, they were all in the myths. And Galatea, a statue. And he is kissing the statue and she is coming to life. It's the myth that's been picked up in things like Pretty Woman and Eliza Doolittle, where
Cinderella,
exactly, where a powerful man, and Sleeping Beauty, a powerful man is what the woman is waiting for to give her life and meaning and validity. So the sculptor didn't like real women. He thought they were all whores and wanton, really going back again to the sex is sin and it starts with women. And so he shunned all women and he locked himself in his sculptor's studio and he chiseled out of pure white ivory, the perfect woman, the beautiful, pure, innocent, good, obedient woman made of pure white ivory. And he fell in love with her, and his love was so pure that Venus brought the statue to life, and he married her and had children because she was a good woman. And a lot of the myth in the storytelling has to do with her body, her breasts, her figure. And she's on the pedestal. And she's white, and she's thin, and she's beautiful. And I feel we are under the sway of that myth, women. There is this image on the pedestal that we're all supposed to look like. We're supposed to look like one kind of woman. And if we do, men will love us. And it's not just about men.
Right.
It's culture. And culture influences every kind of relationship. It doesn't have to be heterosexual. We are supposed to look like something. And even when we don't, and even when we say, I don't give a crap, I'm going to look like, we still do. We still do. We're still like, maybe this. And men suffer from it too, but not to the extent that women do. So the myth of Galatea, reconstructing that myth, is, first of all, taking her off the pedestal, like saying, come on down, Galatea. We don't have to be up there. The gaze of someone else is not about our beauty. Make it your own gaze. Look at yourself. See yourself for who you are in your body, in your mind, in your soul. The male gaze, the cultural gaze, it's a prison for women, and it hurts us. And it makes us be competitive and unhealthy. So that's the myth of Galatea and Pygmalion.
And how does that connect to what you call innervism?
Oh, well, you really did read the book, Mark.
Of course I read your book.
Well, the book has 3 sections, and the last section, I've walked these 2 paths in my life. I know you have too, Mark. I'm a spiritual seeker. I have been since I was a little girl. And by that, I mean, I firmly believe that any change in the world comes from change within. You know, what's the world? What's society? It's a bunch of us acting out our inner dramas on each other to the extent of our consciousness evolution. We're on a spectrum of crude and cruel to refined and enlightened, and we're all somewhere on that arc, and we're going back and forth, and some days we're better than other days, and some days our unruly childlike ego prevails and we're mean and awful and slothful, and some days we're awake and better spirited. And I know that it all starts there, and the biggest responsibility is for me to work on me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I call being an innervist. But because I'm also an activist, or I want to be an activist, like my intention is to act, to believe this world also needs immediate action sometimes. We can't just wait to become enlightened, or none of us will ever do anything. I wanted the last chapter of this book to try to bring together the innervism in me, spiritual work on self, and this urge to be part of a solution. Whether we're an epidemiologist who's trying to find a cure now, or we're a feminist, or we're involved in social justice movements, whatever our call for action is, and everybody's is different. Maybe your call for action is just being a better parent. Maybe it's, serving on your local school board. You don't have to join the United Nations to be an activist. Maybe it's just being a nicer person to your husband. That's the really big challenge. So I'm not saying activism, you have to join a movement, but there's a tension in me between, look, it's all about finding this inner well of peace and faith and love of self, of calming the ego, of not needing to be special, being part as opposed to being just one, of prevailing. Like, that's work on the self. That's meditation and working with a therapist, and, owning your demons, and transforming them into good power. That's a lifelong journey, and it takes a lot of work, and it's beautiful. But so is having a backbone, that you're not afraid to make a difference in this world, and not always liked, and not always be good. This, yeah, I'm going to do it. I have to do it. I have to be brave. I have to stick my neck out and be brave here. So those two things often are like, when this, when that, how much of this, how much of that. So the last part of the book is about bringing those two things, innervism, activism, together through practice, through spiritual practice. And I do offer a few meditations and different ways to marry those parts of self.
And that's what Joan means when she talks about a soft center and a strong back?
Yes.
Or a soft front and a strong back?
Front. This is a teacher that both Mark and I really love, Joan Halifax. She's a Roshi, she's a Zen Roshi master. And she has taught for years a practice that she calls strong back, soft front. It's this idea that if your backbone is really strong, and you in meditation, your body becomes symbology for being in the world. So just to sit, like people say, well, what's meditation? Really? All it is for me, and it's not simple because it's hard, is maintaining this back. And that's what yoga's all about, having this sense of, the phrase, I got you, I got your back. You have your own back. Have this sense of, I am strong, I am noble, I am here, I am here. But if that's all you are, you become sort of an asshole, like roar. So at the same time, you have this strong back, but you have this very soft, open chest. Chogyam Trungpa, the Tibetan teacher, he called it the warrior's heart of sadness. And he said there's not a good translation from Tibetan to English what he meant by sadness, because it's really more like a heart that is so sensitive that everything touches it. You could cry at any moment about the beauty and the sorrow of the world. But if that's all you are,
Right.
Who could exist?
Right.
So you have this strong back and this tender heart, and you go out into the world like that. And for me, meditation, that's the practice. I strengthen my back, soften my heart, and I sit in the mess of life, and I pray for that balance, that sweet spot between the two. And I gave a name to it because my sister, who was a nurse and a very tough character, and my last book was about her. She died a couple of years ago from lymphoma, and I was her bone marrow donor. And after she died, I found this needle point in her office, and it said, because she's a nurse practitioner, "Do no harm, but take no shit." And that has become sort of the code word for this practice for me of a strong back and soft heart. Take no shit. You know, you're not going to lose your sense of self and be blown over in a world that tells you you're not a valid human. So don't take that shit, but do no harm. Don't become the very forces we know are destructive. Don't become a destructive force. Nietzsche, I quote this in the book, Friedrich Nietzsche says, be careful when battling monsters. Be careful when battling monsters that you don't become one.
And is that a message for the women's movement and for
Absolutely.
women in power?
Absolutely. If we just think that women, by virtue of our anatomy, are the new leaders, the kind leaders, the inclusive leaders, and all you need is a vagina to join, we are sorely misled. Anyone can be corrupted by power. And we have millennia of a caretaking nature, in many ways because we had to. We had to have that role. And other ways because, it's true that estrogen does, I have 2 men friends who had to be on hormones battling, what's the cancer? Prostate cancer.
Oh, prostate cancer.
Prostate cancer. One of the cures is suppressing the cancer by taking estrogen, suppressing progesterone. Which, anyway, one of them said to me, "Wow, that year I was the nicest person I have ever been." I actually wanted to talk to people. It was amazing. And then when I got off it, I just went right back. So much of who we are hormones, it just is. You may not want to think that, but it is who we are. And it doesn't really matter to me anymore. Nurture, nature, I don't care. Women do have in us, from nurture and nature, from being deprived some roles and forced into other roles, we have grooves in our brain that make us more likely to care than to compete, to include than to exclude. But we have to nurture those tendencies in ourselves, believe in them, and the minute we get power, not be seduced into the paradigm that's been around for a long time. Or we'll just it'll just be the same.
Right. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's so great to talk to you. This is such a beautiful book.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks.
It's my pleasure. So I'll see you soon.
I hope so, in real life.
In real life. Bye, my dear.
Bye.
Bye.